Hey, I am Michael G. Williams. I am one of the author guests at Illogicon this year. I have a bunch of novels that have been published by Falstaff Books called The Withrow Chronicles, the first of which is called Perishables and is an award-winning novel. Thank you. And I am going to read from a bunch of unpublished work, including the last book of The Withrow Chronicles, potentially, and also the first book of a new series for Falstaff, a series of novellas called Servant Sovereign, about the ghost of Emperor Joshua Norton I, who was an eccentric from the 19th century in San Francisco who declared himself Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, whose ghost has been summoned back by two contemporary witches who live in San Francisco in modern times. So, I'm going to start off with the first of the Servant Sovereign series is called Through the Doors of Oblivion, which is a phrase from one of the better obituaries that was written about Emperor Norton when he died. When Emperor Norton died, the city celebrated him in a way that they have never celebrated anybody since. 10 to 30,000 people, depending on the estimates that you believe, showed up to his funeral, but 10,000 is the low end. And the Masonic Lodge in San Francisco and a gentleman's club called the Pacific Club put together a bunch of money. He had this huge, long, 2-mile-long funeral procession. Everyone in the city turned up. So it was pretty amazing. In the story, two modern-day witches go to the place where he died and perform a ritual to summon back not exactly Emperor Norton, but the idea of Emperor Norton. And they have now trapped that idea in a poster. They live in a studio apartment in the Tenderloin in San Francisco, and they have covered the walls in posters of celebrities whose influence they would like to use in their magic. The poster went in a place of honor, as one might expect. Madge tore down a couple of the Marilyn Monroes and all of the JFKs. She decided to save that sort of tense energy for some other occasion. Emperor Norton went right up over the altar she kept on the north side of her apartment and lined up a row of black beeswax candles underneath it. Black for north and for grounding and for keeping bound that which they had summoned, and beeswax to perfume the air and hopefully sweeten the relationship they would have to this, Madge swallowed as she let herself think it, slave. Technically, I think he's more of a tulpa than a ghost, Iria said. It was like they could read the meaning behind something as small as Madge's hesitation. They clicked like that, always in harmony with one another, even when they played different notes, even when the chord they struck was in a minor key. You know, a thought form rather than the soul itself. We have a really strong idea of Emperor Norton based on the writing about him, but like you were saying about what he did or didn't believe in terms of religion, it's hard to know the actual person. There's too much romanticism around him. So when I set my intention before the ritual, I decided what I wanted to get back is the idea of Emperor Norton, because all the stories about him make him seem like such a good and accommodating guy. What if the real Emperor Norton was just, nuts? What if he was just a vagrant who got romanticized to sell newspapers? That's not useful. So I'm trying to build some insurance in against that. Madge looked out the window at the lights of the Tenderloin. Cars passed beneath their humble home. She could hear the conversations of the people who lived on the street outside. The cast of characters out there shifted from time to time, but there was always drama, always activity, always a sneaking suspicion on her part those people were the real San Francisco, and she was the itinerant lodger on the verge of drifting elsewhere. Madge had a lease, but it would run out one day, and some of the people down there had lived right here on this block for years. They just happened to live outside. What if I'm having second thoughts on this project? Madge looked back at Iria finally. Tulpa, Iria repeated. Their expression wasn't hard, though. They looked at Madge with their typical kindness. Not an actual soul. Summoning him up and having him do our bidding is no different than writing a story in which he does the same thing. Madge arched her eyebrows for a second, then lowered them. Well, that is one way of looking at it. She thought for a second. Is that why he knew he was dead? You summed him up out of texts about his life that also talk about his death? Iria shook their head. No idea. Maybe just that he was always really good at persisting in a pattern of behavior despite the evidence of his senses. I say we give it a shot. And if it doesn't work out, we release him back into... Iria waved a hand at the ceiling and the sky beyond it. You know, wherever tulpas come from. Madge sucked her lower lip for a second and then got a look of guilty mischief as she grinned up at Iria. It was really badass the way that the ritual worked so well. Iria grinned. It was. Okay, Madge said. Let's get to know our guy. When Iria summoned him back, it was fast. They lit the candles, said the key they sat when they enchanted the poster in the first place, and snapped their fingers, and just like he'd been sitting there waiting to be called, Emperor Norton stepped out of the poster and into the room. Norton was as he looked the night before, squat, round, with a bushy beard and hair, both black with streaks of gray and white, neither of which had seen a brush in a bit of a while. His dress was dignified if ratty, a potpourri of military branches and ranks and insignias. He wore a long blue Union Army officer's coat with white epaulettes and cords of office. There were a few medals on his chest, though Madge suspected they were not exactly government issue. Norton had a cane and a tall hat, like a top hat with a wider brim. The books called it a beaver hat, and on it were a collection of peacock feathers and a blue and red ribbon. He was Caucasian, and the lines of his face were deep. He looked like he spent a lot of time outside. Madge recalled Norton was flat broke when he died. The total worth of his goods and cash came out to something like $10. He probably walked everywhere, and though San Francisco had a reputation for fog, it saw plenty of sun, too. Norton twisted his mustache back and forth as he ran his hand around his lips. He drew himself up to his full height, which was quite small, and gazed across at Madge and then up at Iria. Ah, His Imperial Majesty said. You ladies again. Now, what's this business of being bound? Madge gritted her teeth. Not ladies, Iria said. They had that look of exasperation one gets when one has explained the same thing 100 billion times. Persons. Norton looked from Madge, maybe 4'11" if she stood on her tiptoes, back to Iria, who was at least 5'11". You are not a lady? Iria shook their head. I identify as genderqueer. I don't want to be referred to as him or her. I am a they. Iria shrugged at him. They were tall, as said, white, with long, straight, very dark black hair and green eyes. They flicked the hair back out of their face and nodded at Norton. Got it? But are you a man or a woman? Norton persisted, but politely. That was the thing that struck both Iria and Madge. He wasn't getting it, but it wasn't the obstinate, willful not getting it of someone trying to shame them for their identity. It was the not getting it of the well-meaning but completely ignorant. Neither, Iria said. Perhaps both. I'm me, not what anybody else assumes about me based on an arbitrary classification. Is this a matter of biology? Norton's tone was, still, nothing more than neutral. Iria arched both eyebrows and replied in a tone they worked to keep even. No, it is a matter of who I know myself to be. Your Majesty, Madge said, interjecting, who conferred the title of Emperor onto you? Who presided over your coronation? Norton worked his beard this way and that again, then met Madge's eyes. No one, he said. His voice was a little smaller than before, but he regained confidence as he spoke. I announced my ascension to the throne in the evening bulletin of 17 September 1859. I required no presiding authority. I knew it to be right. Iria nodded at Norton. That's me, and being a they instead of a he or a she. I know it's right, and everybody else can deal with it. Norton looked at the head of his cane as he turned this over in his mind. Looking at Iria again, he said, and are you allowed to vote? There was a sparkle of clever clarity in his eye. The question was a trap. Everyone can vote now, Iria said. Norton tugged at the corners of his jacket. Well, he said, though I do not recognize the legitimacy of the rump parliament calling itself Congress since the war between our several states, I am at least gratified to see my decree of suffrage for all has been heeded. Your decree, Madge smiled a little. Of course, Norton replied. That was one of my many proclamations I published in my reign. Iria furrowed their brow. That one did not actually make it into the history books. They and Madge exchanged a look. That was trouble, because that meant whatever they had summoned up was more than what was in the books they used to summon him. Anyway, Madge said, pushing ahead brightly, there are certain terms to your summoning and binding, and we wish to discuss those with you now. The use of the singular they, however, is a bit controversial, Norton said. There has been substantial writing on the topic, you know. Norton was still addressing Iria. There are a number of non-specific pronouns that have been proposed. I believe the last I read was "u," which can be used in the singular and refer to anyone in equal regard. It is informal at best, I admit, and just as likely to grate on the tongue of the grammarian as any other solution, but we must start somewhere. They, Iria insisted. They and Norton locked eyes in a stare-down that lasted a few moments. Since when are you, the self-declared emperor of a democracy that never recognized you, a stickler for the fucking rules? What do you like to be called? Madge said again, trying so hard to cut the tension. Norton broke the staring contest first and looked at Madge. Your Imperial Majesty, or just Your Majesty. I often refer to myself as the Imperial Personage. So how about if we respect your terms, Madge said, and you respect ours? Norton considered this for long seconds, then doffed his hat to her and again to Iria. As you wish, of course. I mean nothing but respect. It is important we know where we stand with one another. Iria visibly relaxed. They were accustomed only to self-conscious acquiescence or to hearing arguments against their pronouns. It wasn't often they had someone ask questions without intending offense, and it was a little hard to swallow. Respect is not the same thing as curiosity, and Iria had long realized it was up to themselves to assert that they were not necessarily required to be anyone else's teacher. After all, hadn't the point of summoning Norton been to have a servant, rather than a new kind of nosy old uncle full of snide remarks? In your time, you issued your own currency, Norton dollars. Do you recall that? Iria said, steering things back to the terms of Norton's servitude. Technically, they were promissory notes, Norton replied with a small smile, to be redeemed with interest in due time, not unlike a bond or certificate of deposit. They were a promise, with the backing of the Imperial Treasury, to be bought back upon maturity. Norton raised a finger to emphasize the next point. My reputation was so trusted, he said, and the love of my subjects so complete, that these notes were accepted as currency in all the most respected businesses of San Francisco. The Norton dollar was as good as any ever printed by the illegitimate governments of the United States, I can assure you of that, and infinitely more acceptable than anything printed by the unlawful rebellion of the Confederates. Let me equally assure you of that. The false government in Washington may have insisted on minting its coins right here in my capital, a most tiresome taunt on their part, and one clearly targeted at my noble regime, but at least I can say the citizens of San Francisco had no love in their hearts for the worthless paper of the southern states. Your Imperial Treasury, Iria mumbled, but Madge spoke over them. Right, well, did you ever pay out on any of those promissory notes? Did you ever actually buy any of them back? Norton opened his mouth to speak, but paused. He looked this way and that, along the seams of the wood planks in the floor, then up at them. I fear I did not. Time to make good on some promises, Your Majesty, Iria said, holding up a yellowed rectangle of paper with faded script and a messy signature. I've got all the Norton dollars left. You are in my service until you earn them back. You do what I ask, and I pay you for it with your own money. Don't worry, there aren't many of them left, so you won't be in... Madge realized Iria had been about to say enslaved, and stopped himself. Our service, for long. But that also means each note is all the more valuable thanks to the basic economic principle of scarcity. Norton looked worried for the first time in their conversation. He never once asked about the electric lights. He never asked about their shabby abode, a room in an old building with a double bed and a bathroom the size of a shoebox and a kitchenette glued to one wall. He never asked about the lights outside or the sounds of the cars in the streets or when or how he died or what year it was or anything. Norton was completely impervious to the facts at hand if they were inconvenient. Madge was a little envious and a little annoyed. How many? Norton paused, cleared his throat, and asked again, how many of my imperial notes still exist? 12, Iria said. They held up the whole stack. You are bound to these, Norton. Work to earn them back, and when you're paid the last one, you'll be free. Until then, well, Iria nodded at the poster. Norton followed their glance and looked at the likeness of himself. Until then, I am your servant, Norton said, and his voice sounded tired. Don't think of it as an obligation, Madge said. Think of it as an opportunity. What shall be my tasks? Shall I be made to clean your home? Norton gestured around. To sweep the streets for horse manure? To clean stables? To do the washing up? What task can you possibly require of me that befits my station? What are you to think? Who are you to think the rightful ruler of this land could possibly be transformed into your chamberlain? The words were ones of anger, of bitterness, but Norton's voice was merely sad, shading into resignation. Iria surprised Madge with their good grace as they responded. Your Majesty, they said, your sense of humor is as grand as was said of you. Iria smiled and Norton's eyes lit up with a touch of something more hopeful, the kindness he'd become accustomed in life to hoping would greet him. We're going to send you back in time across the history of San Francisco to bring us the keys to the city itself. Norton lifted his face and considered Iria carefully, appraisingly, before speaking. And what shall you do to my city once you have them? Iria smiled at him. We aim to protect it, they said. From what, exactly? Madge addressed Norton, hands open. Dark forces are coming for the city, she said. It's going to be tough to explain, but we need to save the city from dark forces. The spiritual embodiment of greed itself. And we need four keys to the city to do that. Norton squared his shoulders. Then he said, spare me no details. It sounds like this is serious business, my good... He struggled, and then he gathered himself. My good persons. Iria smiled a little. That wasn't so hard, was it? Let's see.
I'm disappointed that it wasn't kitties because that would have been amazing.
I know.
Like,
kitties of the city.
like four kitties of the city.
Is it too late to rewrite?
I don't know. I could make cats now. I've got a lot of cool historical artifacts from San Francisco. The first one is about Emperor Norton being sent back in time to steal the original Bear Republic flag.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake and resulting fire, unless Emperor Norton steals it from the building before the earthquake. So, let's see. I've read that before for a couple of you. Let's see. Okay. How much time do I have? I have plenty of time. I have tons of time. He wants to hear some future noir detective stuff. But I have also sold the Falstaff books, and it's going to be a long time before it's published. Sure. Okay. Excellent. Future noir. So I'm going to read the first bit of it, and then I'm going to read the second bit. This is the beginning of the fall in autumn, which is 9,000 years in the future. When Buttercup saw me, I had a glass of air-reactive sake in one hand, and in the other a bean pastry I could have used to club an alligator to death. I tracked the big lug for an hour before he finally made me, right there in the middle of Lower Market. Yes, that is its name. It is not my fault the Empire breeds creativity out of the bureaucratic class. Buttercup, the big lug, gave me a look from under the brim of his hat, one that said in no uncertain terms he would be very much looking forward to my funeral. I thought, quite mistaken, I would be undetectable in the middle of all the glow splash and the condensation mist and the hundreds of meters of low market stalls heaped against one another like drifts of filthy snow. I don't know why I named the guy Buttercup, but I did, and it stuck. I bestowed that moniker on him a couple of days before when the client showed me a likeness of him and told me where to find him on Saturday afternoons. The client wanted him tailed to see how he was passing his time. I figured she was a jilted girlfriend or maybe a wannabe with a little cash to burn, throwing detectives down the wishing well. Find out where he hangs out, what he does, and just happen to be there herself next time. You know, the usual. Buttercup was at least 300 kilograms of uncooked beef, and not all of it the lean stuff. But, as they say, it takes all kinds. The client was a Manny with the iridescent eyes and the peaked, glinting, halfway-to-talons fingernails to prove it. She was made for detailed work in the dark. I didn't ask her how she earns her birdseed, but I figured it was something in the middle. Good enough to hire me, but not good enough to hire someone better. Buttercup, on the other hand, was all fisticuffs and heavy lifting. Opposites attract, right? You never know in my business, which is just the business of trying to find things out. The funny thing is, half the time when it all comes together, when we answer the client's question, when we reach wrist deep into the muck and pull out the truth with a stream of something that smells bad running off the corners, we wish we didn't know anymore whatever it is we do. Knowing a thing, knowing a person, knowing a secret can hurt worse than any patch of briars you have to wade through on the way there. Not a lot of detectives will take a Manny as a client, but not a lot of Mannies were interested in hiring an Artie, so I figured we were even on that score. I'm not picky about my clients personally, and not just because I'm by nature such a big-hearted egalitarian guy either. I like to think I take people as I meet them, rather than trying to shove them into the nearest box. But that isn't the point. Mainly I'm not picky about clients because I can't afford to be. Here I am, born the old-fashioned way from people too nice or too dumb, to be honest, a little of both, to know better, but I live in the city of autumn anyway. By that fact alone, I'm already kind of a freak. I will always look different, sound different, and think different from the rest of the people who've been built for a place like this. No one in either end of the social spectrum will ever quite know what to do with me. Sometimes when I stare into the reflecting pool that is every single bottle of hooch ever made across the whole history of people deciding to bottle up ways to get stinko, I know in my heart I like it that way. Autumn, last of the great flying cities of the ancients, is a freak show through and through. Antiquated, idolized, hated, mocked, resented for its wealth and for the disparities in wealth and power evident at even a cursory glance. It's beautiful, careworn, crowded, lonely, cosmopolitan, and suffused with a certain kind of knowing the city itself will surely never last forever. The whole place is just waiting for some other shoe to drop, a shoe it cannot describe, cannot name, and cannot explain. But it knows that shoe is out there all the same, and the city hopes to the gods that shoe is not the city itself. We find solace in the groupthink of living in a place so many others live, and we find ourselves annoyed at the traffic. We find fear for its future when we read the histories of its dead sisters from the past, and we find ourselves wishing something would come along to clean it out just a little, but not a lot. So here we all are, every last one of us feeling like the rat with the nicest cage, and every last one of us wishing he had it to himself. I figured out a long time ago the biggest freak in the whole show gets two things, spit on and space. I could handle one if it got me the other, no problem, and thank you kindly. That, I have to get so I've gotten the edits from the editor for it. The editor's comments were, wow, this character really hates himself. And I was like, A, he's the star of a noir detective story, so yes. B, because a big part of the story that this character is dying, and terminal illness tends to be kind of a downer. So, yeah.
Were they better or worse than Milo Yiannopoulos' editor?
Much kinder than Milo's.
How many black dick jokes were you editing?
All of them. They're very generous and Falstaff books and that kind of thing. So later in the novel, he has gone to the place where people cruise in this city because he would like a place either to himself or very much not to himself. And it's a place called Downs Preserves, and it's this big park in the city. I settled down on my branch, the weight of my failing body suddenly greater than I remembered it being on the hike up. Exhaustion tied itself to all my corners and sank. He likes it. Exhaustion tied itself to all my corners and sank. Exhaustion from the night spent drinking, from my liver working overtime to deal with all that booze, from my walk across the city's landscape, from too little sleep gotten on a lumpy couch in a cold office I could no longer afford. The pink edge of the sky turned red and then yellow, and just as a tiny crescent of the sun himself started to crest over the floor barrier and golden spotlights shot westward between the buildings of my beautiful city, I heard rustling from below as someone approached quietly, but not stealthily. The footfalls of a person who didn't want to disturb their own reverie by stomping around. At this point, his client is an android, which in his culture is referred to as a golem. And that android is named Alejandro. It was Alejandro walking into the clearing at the climax of the fuck trail, and he was turning to face the sunrise and closing his eyes as the rays struck him all at once. I stayed where I was, quiet as I could be, my gaze shifting back and forth between the absurdly beautiful lights, between the absurdly beautiful light show on the horizon, and that same light playing across Alejandro's simultaneously too smooth and too human features. Do you often come here in the morning? His voice was quiet, but it carried, and anyway, he didn't exactly have a lot of competition to be heard. Alejandro turned to face me, or at least in my direction, despite me thinking I was hidden. I do, he went on. I come here to watch the sunrise at least once a week. It, walked closer to me. He didn't seem to know exactly where I was, though it occurred to me he was just pretending in order to be polite. I couldn't stand the thought of that. Couldn't stand the thought of being pandered to by a machine designed to make me like him in the first place. So I half jumped and half tumbled right out of the tree and onto the ground, the alcohol cushioning me for the moment against the worst of the pain of impact. I could tell when I landed I was a little thinner in the bones than 6 months before. It was the first time I felt frail. I love to come here, I said from where I lay, still crumpled awkwardly on the ground, not even trying to stand up, my coat twisted up around me and my hat fallen to the side. And, frankly, I love to come here. I rolled over onto my side and then up onto one leg, then another, standing unsteadily and half-heartedly dusting myself off. I hoped to bother him with that. I wanted to offend the delicate sensibilities I associated with these timeless, semi-legendary creatures of metal and soft eyes and room-temperature false flesh. Alejandro walked over to just outside of arm's reach, looked at me with those eyes narrowed in sympathy, a surplus of forgiveness for whatever dumb idea resulted in me being here at the literal crack of dawn. You're dying, aren't you? He said. I blinked. How did everyone know? Did the Church of the Infinite Upward Spiral of the Double Helix tattoo it on my fucking forehead? We get used to noticing things, he said in response to my frown. Golems, I mean. We spend enough time around people to detect patterns. He tried to look a little self-conscious about it and almost succeeded. I figured he did the best he could do with the false facial musculature his designers gave him. I'm sorry, he said. I'm dying, I said. Apologies are a waste of time. So is anger, Alejandro countered. No, it isn't, I said. Sometimes anger is the closest thing I can find to a reason to live. There are mornings when the only thing getting me out of bed is the desire to piss people off. What about the other days? What gets you out of bed when you aren't angry? He looked sad, like he'd heard these sorts of antics before. And maybe he had. Maybe he'd been around since before the ancients popped their big balloon. Maybe he'd had 100,000 humans tell him all about how sad we were. I hated all of them too. The same thing getting anyone else out of bed. The rent, a cup of coffee, and the hope I'll maybe get laid if I'm lucky. I sure as shit don't do it for the home-cooked meals. That was when he kissed me, and I kissed him, and the two of us did something halfway between fucking and making love right there in the middle of down preserves, while the sun came up on autumn, and a virtuously busy morning wound its springs without us. The sun was over the trees at the southeastern edge of the sloped opening in the forest when I awoke. It was the sun that woke me, actually, its rays on my face, the flicker of shadow and light as it played across my closed eyes. I was half-dressed, but my shoes were off, my feet bare, and my coat was spread over me in lieu of a blanket. My shirt was somewhere, probably. I wasn't wearing it anyway, and my eyes weren't open yet, but I could feel it was nearby, the way you can sense an old dog by your chair, or a former lover on the opposite side of an otherwise perfectly nice party. My back was curled against something firm and supporting, and I felt gentle fingers stroke the tufts of black in my temples. Hematite, a man once told me. I would always love him a little for saying that. My hair there wasn't gray yet, but it wasn't exactly black, and when it was wet, it looked like hematite, he said. And he said it like it meant something deep and significant and mystical that I would never understand. Having someone's fingers run through it felt good, though. It felt like a happy memory, like something I didn't expect would happen much anymore if it ever really happened in the first place. That simple touch was a comfort to me. It's the most minor thing, and for that reason the most missed when it's gone. I don't go long stretches without being touched, but it had been a while between caresses. This was that. A caress, and more. Not exactly sexual, but not exactly platonic. It was that happy in-between we call intimate. I made myself vulnerable to other men, and they themselves to me more times than I can count in my too short life. It didn't always work out, though, that my usual flavor of street trade would show basic human kindness in return for mine. None of that mattered, though. Those guys were long gone. Right that second, someone was running his fingers through my half-asleep hair, and it was intimate, and they were kind, and I was vulnerable, and that was okay. Because for a few moments I wasn't dying and I wasn't afraid. I wasn't lonely and I wasn't alone. The sun felt good, and the breeze through the branches was the sound of Gaia herself telling me to go back to sleep. And I thought for a moment it might be okay with dying fairly soon if I got to wake up like this every morning for the rest of my life. Okay, I said. I didn't move and I didn't open my eyes because I wasn't quite ready for the moment to go away even as I ended it. You want something? So tell me what it is, because if I say yes, I may not have much time to hold up my end of the bargain. I really love that novel. It's a really fun one.
I thought it was interesting correcting himself from him to it.
Yeah, he's trying so hard not to think of that character as a person.
Yeah.
It's very important to him that he not think of that character as a person.
But then he ends up hooking up with that character.
Mm-hmm.
And complicated.
Mm-hmm. Their relationship is very complicated. And he is continually pissed off that people have figured out that he's dying. He's like so angry all the time. He's not a nice person. But he doesn't have a lot of reasons to be nice.
You know.
Well, that's true. I do.
You're not dying.
I'm not dying.
Okay.
I mean, eventually, but you know. But it gets to stay a fun mystery for now. So this is from that, which is the title that's very difficult to spell. No, this is from the last Withrow novel, and it's from an early scene where, in the Withrow Chronicles, there are two characters who are not Withrow, but who are very much the main characters. There is his cousin Roderick, who became a vampire in the 60s and has sort of stayed youthful and exuberant. and is also clearly insane and probably a serial killer, but nobody's asking too many questions. And there is Jennifer, who is a character who has slowly but surely become fully human and also more than human. She starts out as a person who has no idea what's going on in the world and is now in charge of a coven of techno-pagans. And they have received an invitation basically to go fight the final battle of the war that they have found themselves waging against their wish. Let's see. They've received a message that includes the phrase, "Master, remember the Athenians," which is a quote. That was the first thought through my head when I awoke the next night, and it was the thing. Oh, and this novelist, by the way, is called "Nobody Gets Out Alive." Master, remember the Athenians. That was the first thought through my head when I woke the next night, and it was the thing Jennifer repeated to herself every few minutes as Roderick and she and I sat at the bar of Mamma Mia's Tex-Mex Italiano out on Glenwood Avenue, across from the mall the next night. Smiles was again beside me, this time in the red service animal vest I'd bought him on the internet. He sat with his back to us, staring at the door. People around us ate and talked and drank, and for the most part ignored us altogether. When someone did look at us, a glance from me would help them find somewhere else to put their attention. "So, do you want to go fight them?" Jennifer asked it neutrally. She wasn't trying to provoke a particular answer. "Yes," Roderick said. I glanced at him, then back at her. "Yes," I said, "but..." Jennifer cut me off. "But this is a vampire problem, you're going to say, so let me cut you off right there. Let me just take that phrase out of your mouth myself," she said, and she reached up with her hand as she mimed pulling something out of my mouth. Then she extended her arm as though holding it far from herself. "Now, let me flip it off," which she then did with her other hand. "And now I'm going to crumble that phrase into powder and with a puff of breath send it far, far away." And she mimed doing that too. I glared at her with half-lidded eyes the whole time. "Party fucking hard," I said. She shrugged at me. "Withrow, these people killed some of my people. More of my people, actually, than yours. And I didn't see you at their funerals." That's done. She was right, though. It'd been at night, too. I hadn't thought maybe that was so vampires could show up. I thought if I went, I'd be intruding. I looked at Roderick. "Did you go?" Roderick didn't have much of an expression. He simply nodded once. "Yes, cousin," he murmured. A stab of guilt shot through me, and it took me a long second to realize what it was, because I don't normally feel that. Instead, I tend to own whatever happens, and to hell with anybody who doesn't like my choices. "They died for me," Jennifer said, "and they died for you too. I'm not saying they were devoted to the cause of..." She waved a hand around. The too loud music was an instrumental version of the main theme from Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat. Chain restaurants are possibly the most surreal places on the entire planet. I don't know, whatever you think your cause is. Vampire liberation? A different kind of subjugation, only this time to hiding from us instead of hiding from the elders of your own kind? She shook her head. "They died for it, whatever it is. They died because I told them that problem. The problem of what was up with the vampires of North Carolina. The ones who wanted to use a super weapon against humanity was worth dying to try to solve. So goddammit, we will solve that problem once and for all. Let's go there and fight them. And if I die, well, I don't want to live forever, Withrow, and I sure as shit won't spend my remaining days in fear of some monster out of a fucking history book." I sat there and studied her for a long minute. None of us said anything. I had a half-eaten garbage fire of taco burger in front of me. Jennifer ate a steak she said wasn't good but wasn't bad. Roderick's place at the table was empty. When the waiter asked what he wanted, Roderick stared at him until the kid's mouth went slack and drool ran down the corner of his chin. And after that, the waiter never looked at Roderick for the rest of our meal. Now Roderick was staring at me the same way, and I felt that thing I'd felt before, his mind pressing against mine. Not intruding on it, but crowding the shared armrest in our theater seats of psychic experience. "Stop that," I said to him. "Cousin," Roderick said, "will it offend you if I opine as to why you hesitate so often to accept the help of the techno-pagans?" I stared at him, but I did not say no. "Remember what I said to you in Sunset Beach. You must be a part of the world, and if you are to be a part of the world, then you must actively make it the world you want to inhabit. It is that simple. You have no other choice but to die." And there it was again, that notion that death is a choice, just an option to be taken or left on the table as one wills. I left it on the table in the 1940s, but it felt like I kept having to reach over and drag my sleeve through it to get to the rest of what I wanted out of life. I felt Roderick's mind press against mine again, and I practically barked at him like a dog. "God damn it, Roderick, stop doing that!" The bartender didn't look up at us, but she did stop polishing the glass in her hands. I wondered how often she had to throw people out of Mamma Mia's. I reined myself back in a little and glared at Roderick before looking at Jennifer again. Listen, I said, it's not easy accepting someone's help. It's not easy accepting help from a mortal. That's an asshole thing to say, and I know it, and it's just the way it is, so I'm just saying it. That's me, the very portrait of eloquence. I became the boss of the vampires of the state by taking things into my own hands. Needing someone else to help solve what feels like it ought to be my problem and not yours makes me feel like I'm not up to my own job. I hated having help against El Diablo and the Interloper, and I've never looked forward to more. This is supposed to be a solo gig. If I can't run the place on my own, then people will start to think I don't have the fangs for it. Except that you let Sarah help you when you became the boss in the first place, Roderick murmured. Because she was one of us. I snapped back at him. Because she had just as much reason to get rid of the old boss as anyone, and because if I didn't let her be my co-conspirator, then she would become my competition. And I have just as much reason to get rid of these elders as you do, Jennifer said. Her voice was low and insistent, and I froze up a little because I heard danger in that voice, and it surprised me. I have fought them. They have killed us. They want us all dead. Do you think if the elders come roaring back out of the darkness that me and my people won't get hurt too? Do you think it'll be business as usual for the rest of us? Fuck you, Jennifer said, but she was just as calm as the surface of the Dead Sea. She wasn't loud, she wasn't emotional, she wasn't hysterical. Jennifer had a point to make, and she was making it. Stop trying to nail yourself to the cross, Withrow. Yeah, you're a vampire and I'm a witch and we're not the same. You're also not the same as your cousin and he is a vampire. You're not the same as the elders. You're not the same as the book people. I'm not the same as they are. Nobody's the same as any fucking body, Withrow, but we have to band together if we're going to defend ourselves. You became a vampire because you thought you could spend eternity hanging out on your couch undisturbed. And it turns out the world is more complex than that. Well, boo the fuck who, you big goddamn baby. You can go to Charlotte and fight the elders with me, or you can fight me before you go, or you can sit it out and radically reduce my odds of success. Those are your choices. Fuck you, and you're thinking you can give me permission to go with you. I'm giving you permission to go with me, and that's the way it is. I blinked twice, very slowly, taco burger halfway to my mouth. Vampires mostly don't eat, but I can because Agatha made me learn. It's not just a good way to seem human in public, though. I like eating. I always did. Roderick told me I'm a bear in gay terms, which isn't a thing we had in the gay world when I was alive. I never expected 7 decades later to be a fashion. Cousin, Roderick cooed, voice very gentle. I told you in Sunset Beach of the coming changes in mortal society. I believe they will learn of us sooner or later, probably sooner. The rate at which they are able to absorb information about the world around them and correlate disparate data points is accelerating at a pace we simply do not understand. Consider Marty McBride, who used public data to expose the existence of the Transylvanian. Mortals have access to the same data and become increasingly proficient at using it to discover what has been right in front of them all along. It is my considered opinion that the humans who are themselves exceptional, such as Jennifer and her Technopagan Coven, and the book people, for whom you must admit you feel a certain fondness, despite your insistence they are simply useful. It is my considered opinion that they are our only hope of survival once we're exposed. They must be our bridges to the mundane. They must stand with us if the human world is to accept that we exist, and that means we must stand with them. We have foes at this moment, the elders, who threaten both of us. We are stronger together than we are apart. But when this is done, even if we are so completely successful, we must never be concerned with the elders again. We will have other foes. The future will always be waiting for us, full of dangers we do not understand, forces unknown to us, entities who want to harm or enslave us, all manner of threats. We will always have opposition in common, whether an individual monster or the crushing scrutiny of a human society newly and nervously aware of the creatures long hidden among them. Roderick looked at Jennifer for a moment, nodded, then back at me. At first, I cultivated a friendship with Jennifer for purely utilitarian reasons. Yes. But I have learned from our friendship. I have realized we have more in common than not. The differences between us are great, yes, but we share many challenges. We have many of the same concerns. I value our friendship. That is part of what keeps me alive in a way that you are not. It is a defense against my own inertia, that stillness we all find creeps in upon us over time. A prominent AIDS activist told me years ago, cousin, activists live longer. Livelihood is a defense available to you also, cousin. You merely need to allow yourself to be human enough to practice a little vitality. That is the irony of giving away our humanity in return for more time. We must remain a little human if we are to succeed at being the monster. A whole lot of my life flashed before me when Roderick said that. I was angry at him for presuming to understand me, to know the choices I made and why I made them. I won't lie about that. But a lot of what he said rang true, too, and for all my pig-headedness, I could not avoid that truth. All those snapshot moments were lonely ones. Long nights painting in my basement, or watching the TV put on a show for itself, or sitting alone in the back of a movie house. I never minded those moments when I was in them, and usually I'm happier by myself than not. People are tiring as fuck. Passing a whole night without having to say a word to another creature was something I usually did with a sense of fucking finally, not a regret. The only exception was my hellhound, Smiles, who was merely an abnormally large Doberman before I started feeding him my blood. Smiles is linked to me now in a way that goes beyond pet and owner. He's no longer a dog, really. He's an extension of my own survival instinct. Sometimes even I forget that, because dogs and hellhounds alike sometimes do like a scratch behind the ears. Even so, even with all that pleasure I find in my own company, taken all together like that and summed up into one continuous experience of being solitary, the sudden sense of pervasive aloneness felt like a hot knife. I held out my hand to Jennifer. Partners? Jennifer didn't reach back. She asked, equals? We locked eyes for a moment. I usually only make eye contact when I want to get something from someone and I'm about to use the hoodoo on them, but I was not about to do that to Jennifer. For one thing, I knew the hoodoo doesn't work on her. Jennifer's one of those rare humans. For another, I didn't want to use it. I wanted to size her up. I'd fought beside her enough times, you'd think I wouldn't hesitate to trust her. But I'm a vampire, and odds are you're not. We do not trust. We take. We are liars, and we're thieves. Every goddamned one of us. And that puts us in the position of never being able to trust much of anybody ever again. Jennifer's gaze did not stray. She didn't flinch. She stared right back at me. I realized Smiles at some point had turned around and back to the door, his eyes on Jennifer. He was not growling. He was as quiet and still as I've ever seen him. I nodded. Equals. Jennifer took my hand and shook. Then yes, she said. Partners. Roderick reached out and put a hand over both of ours. I could have sworn he looked relieved. And that's when I realized that if I said no, they would have been forced to kill me. Honestly, I didn't blame them. Change isn't easy for anybody, but it's hardest of all for vampires. It's not all that uncommon for somebody to have to die. This was me overthrowing the last guy, Bob III, all over again, but from the other side. My 20 years of solitary rule was over. I wasn't being deposed, not exactly, not like I did to my predecessor. There wasn't some other wolf waiting to take my place as the self-proclaimed alpha of the pack. The whole paradigm was shifting. When this was over, the vampire world, around these parts anyway, would never again look or work or act quite the same. And I'm done.